Entangled Desires, Part 1. Chapter 1, An Unexpected Encounter. The city's skyline shimmered against the backdrop of a twilight sky, casting a vibrant glow over the bustling streets below. Eva stood by the large glass window of her downtown apartment, sipping a glass of wine as she gazed out at the city she had called home for the past decade. There was something exhilarating about the energy of the city, the way it pulsed with life, with possibilities, with opportunities waiting to be seized. She sighed, letting her gaze drift over the sprawling metropolis. Everything she had ever wanted was within her grasp: a successful fashion design business, a network of influential clients, and a reputation for being one of the most sought-after designers in the industry. Yet, despite all her success, there was a persistent emptiness that lingered beneath the surface. Eva turned away from the window and glanced at the clock. It was nearly 7, and she still hadn't decided whether to attend the charity gala she'd been invited to. Normally, she would have jumped at the chance to showcase one of her newest designs on such a prestigious stage, but tonight she felt drained, uninspired. "Get a grip, Eva," she muttered to herself, setting her glass down on the kitchen counter. "You've come too far to start doubting yourself now." She pushed herself away from the counter and made her way to her bedroom, where a beautiful, crimson silk gown lay draped over her bed. It was one of her latest creations, elegant yet daring, with a plunging neckline and a high slit that accentuated her long, toned legs. A dress that demanded attention, just like the woman who wore it. With a determined sigh, Eva slipped into the gown, adjusting the delicate straps over her shoulders. She pinned her dark hair up into an intricate bun, leaving a few loose tendrils to frame her face, and applied a bold shade of red lipstick that perfectly matched the dress. "Ready or not," she whispered to her reflection, "here I come." The gala was held at the luxurious Goldstein Hotel, a towering structure of glass and steel that glittered in the night like a beacon of opulence. The moment Eva stepped out of her car and onto the red carpet, she felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that always accompanied these events. Cameras flashed, and reporters clamored for her attention, but she kept her composure, offering polite smiles and nods as she made her way inside. The grand ballroom was a spectacle of elegance, with crystal chandeliers casting a warm, golden glow over the sea of guests dressed in their finest attire. Waiters in crisp white shirts glided through the crowd, carrying trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. A soft melody played in the background, adding to the sophisticated ambience. Eva scanned the room, her practiced smile firmly in place as she mingled with familiar faces, business magnates, celebrities, and socialites who had all come to support the charitable cause. She exchanged pleasantries, complimented outfits, and posed for a few photographs, but her heart wasn't in it. It all felt so superficial. Eva Monroe, a deep, smooth voice interrupted her thoughts, sending a shiver down her spine. "I've been hoping to run into you." She turned, her gaze locking onto the man standing before her. He was tall and striking, with broad shoulders and a chiseled jawline that looked like it had been carved from stone. His dark hair was slightly tousled, and his piercing blue eyes held a hint of mischief that made her heart skip a beat. "Adrian," she breathed, surprise and confusion warring within her. "What are you doing here?" Adrian Dawson, the renowned architect and owner of Dawson Design Group, flashed her a slow, lazy smile. "I was invited, of course," he replied, his tone casual yet laced with a teasing edge. "But I'm more interested in knowing why you're here, looking like you'd rather be anywhere else." Eva blinked, caught off guard by his directness. "I'm here to support the cause," she said smoothly, regaining her composure. And to catch up with some old friends. Adrian murmured, his gaze lingering on her face. Is that all? There was something in his eyes, a challenge, a spark that made Eva's pulse quicken. She had known Adrian for years. Their paths had crossed countless times at industry events and fundraisers. They'd always maintained a polite, professional relationship, but there had been moments, fleeting, intense moments, when she'd felt an inexplicable pull toward him. Moments like now. "What do you want, Adrian?" she asked softly, her voice steady despite the erratic beat of her heart. He took a step closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "Just a conversation," he said quietly. "A real one. Away from all the noise and pretenses." Eva hesitated, her mind racing. There was something dangerous about this man, something that both intrigued and unsettled her. But she was tired of playing it safe, of hiding behind her carefully constructed facade. "All right," she said finally, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Lead the way." Adrian's smile widened, a slow, satisfied grin that sent a thrill down her spine. He offered his arm, and after a brief pause, Eva placed her hand on his, allowing him to guide her through the crowd and out onto a secluded balcony. The cool night air wrapped around them as they stepped outside, the sounds of the gala fading into the background. The city stretched out below them, a sea of lights and possibilities. Eva took a deep breath, savoring the crispness of the breeze. "It's beautiful out here," she murmured, her gaze fixed on the skyline. "Yes, it is," Adrian agreed, but when she glanced at him, she found his eyes on her, not the view. Much better than being stuck in there with a bunch of people pretending to care. Eva raised an eyebrow. "And you're not pretending?" "Not with you," he said simply, his voice low and sincere. She swallowed hard, her pulse racing. There was an intensity in his gaze, a raw honesty that disarmed her. For so long, she'd been surrounded by people who only saw her as a designer, a brand, a name to be associated with. But in this moment, with Adrian looking at her like she was the only person in the world, she felt seen. "Why me?" she whispered, the question slipping out before she could stop herself. "Why do you care?" Adrian hesitated, his expression softening. "Because I see something in you, Eva. Something more than the poised, perfect image you show everyone else. I see a woman who's passionate, driven, but also lonely." Eva's breath caught, a sharp pang of vulnerability piercing her chest. "I'm not lonely," she said quickly, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. "Maybe not," Adrian murmured, taking a step closer. "But I think you're searching for something. Something real." A lump formed in her throat, and she turned away, struggling to regain control of her emotions. "I don't know what you're talking about," she muttered. "Yes, you do," he said gently, his voice a soothing balm against the turmoil swirling within her. "You're just afraid to admit it." Eva squeezed her eyes shut, frustration and confusion warring within her. Why did this man, this infuriating, perceptive man, have to see through her so easily? Why did he have to make her feel things she'd long since buried? "Adrian, she trailed off, shaking her head. "I don't know if I can do this." "Do what?" he asked softly, his gaze unwavering. "Be vulnerable," she whispered, the words slipping out like a confession. "Let someone in." Adrian's expression softened, and he reached out, gently tilting her chin up until she met his eyes. You don't have to let me in all at once, he murmured. Just, let me in a little. Let's see where it goes. Eva stared at him, her heart pounding in her chest. Every instinct screamed at her to pull back, to put up her walls and retreat to the safety of solitude. But some foolish, reckless part of her, wanted to take the risk. Okay, she whispered, her voice trembling. But no promises. Adrian's smile was slow and genuine, his eyes shining with warmth and something deeper, something that made her breath hitch. No promises, he agreed softly. They stood there in silence for a long moment, the city lights casting a soft glow around them. And for the first time in a long while, Eva allowed herself to hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could find something real. Chapter 2: Unraveling the Mask. The following week was a blur of meetings, fittings, and deadlines as Eva threw herself back into her work. The gala had been a success, her gown had garnered rave reviews, and several high-profile clients had expressed interest in her upcoming collection. By all accounts, she should have been ecstatic. But her mind kept drifting back to that night on the balcony, the feel of Adrian's hand on hers, the sincerity in his gaze, the way his words had pierced through her defenses like a knife through silk. She hadn't heard from him since then, and a part of her was relieved. Their conversation had left her raw and exposed, emotions she'd long since locked away bubbling to the surface. It was unsettling, terrifying even, to think that someone could see through her so easily. But another part of her, a small, stubborn part, missed him. Missed the way he'd looked at her, like she was more than just a successful designer or a pretty face. "Stop it, Eva," she muttered to herself, shaking her head as she stood in front of her design studio's massive mood board. "You're being ridiculous." Still, she couldn't help the tiny thrill of anticipation that coursed through her when her assistant, Lily, poked her head into the room later that day. "Eva, you have a visitor," Lily announced, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "Mr. Adrian Dawson." Eva's heart skipped a beat, and she quickly composed herself, smoothing her hands over her dress. "Send him in," she said, her voice steady despite the butterflies swirling in her stomach. When Adrian walked through the door, his presence seemed to fill the room, his gaze locking onto hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Eva," he greeted, his voice warm and rich. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," she replied smoothly, gesturing for him to sit. "What brings you here, Adrian?" He hesitated, his gaze flickering over the sketches and fabric swatches scattered across the studio. "I wanted to see you," he admitted, his tone earnest. "Anne. I was hoping we could talk." Eva raised an eyebrow, curiosity and wariness warring within her. "Talk? About what?" "About that night," he said quietly, his eyes never leaving hers. "About us." Entangled Desires, Part 2. Chapter 3: Crossing the Line. Eva stared at Adrian, her heart pounding. "There is no us, Adrian," she said slowly, her voice carefully measured. "We barely know each other." "Maybe," he agreed, leaning back slightly, his eyes never leaving hers. "But I want to change that." She swallowed hard, uncertainty and anticipation warring within her. This was dangerous territory, they both knew it. Whatever this was between them, it was more than just attraction. It was a spark, a magnetic pull that defied logic and reason. And it terrified her. "Why?" she asked softly, genuinely curious. Why me? Adrian's gaze softened, and he reached out, gently tracing the edge of one of her sketches with his finger. Because you're not like anyone else I've ever met, he murmured. Because I see a fire in you, a passion that's rare, and I want to know more. I want to know what makes you burn. Eva's breath hitched at his words, a shiver running down her spine. He was too close, his presence too overwhelming. She needed to regain control, to put some distance between them before she lost herself completely. Adrian, we shouldn't, she began, but he cut her off, his gaze fierce and unyielding. Why not? He asked, his voice low and intense. Because it's risky. Because it scares you. Yes, she whispered, the admission slipping out before she could stop herself. Then let it scare you, he murmured, stepping closer until there was barely an inch of space between them. Let it be risky. But don't run away from it. Don't run away from me. Eva's heart pounded in her chest, her mind screaming at her to back away, to push him out of her life before it was too late. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw something raw, something real. And she knew, deep down, that she couldn't walk away. Not this time. Okay, she breathed, her voice trembling. But I need time. I need to figure out what this is, what we are. Adrian's expression softened, a slow smile spreading across his lips. Take all the time you need, Eva, he murmured. I'm not going anywhere. They stood there for a long moment, the tension between them electric, crackling like a live wire. Then, slowly, Adrian reached out and took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. Let's start over, he said softly. No expectations, no pressure. Just two people getting to know each other. Eva hesitated, then nodded slowly. I can do that. Good, he murmured, his thumb gently brushing over her knuckles. How about dinner tonight? No business, no pretenses. Just us. Eva's heart fluttered, a mixture of fear and excitement coursing through her. Okay, she agreed quietly. Dinner sounds nice. Great, Adrian said, his smile widening. I'll pick you up at 7. As he turned to leave, Eva couldn't help but watch him, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. She knew this was dangerous, that letting him in could shatter the careful balance she'd built in her life. But something told her that it was a risk worth taking. Because for the first time in a long time, she felt alive. Chapter 4: Dinner and Deception. That evening, Eva found herself standing in front of her mirror, staring at her reflection with a mixture of nerves and anticipation. She'd chosen a simple, elegant dress, a soft, midnight blue silk that hugged her curves without being overly revealing. Her hair was left loose, cascading over her shoulders in soft waves, and she'd kept her makeup minimal, opting for a hint of eyeliner and a touch of lipstick. Stop overthinking it, Eva, she muttered to herself, smoothing a stray lock of hair. It's just dinner. But even as she said the words, she knew they weren't true. This wasn't just dinner. This was the beginning of something new, something unpredictable. And it scared her. The sound of the doorbell jolted her from her thoughts, and she took a deep breath, steadying herself before making her way to the door. When she opened it, her breath caught in her throat. Adrian stood on the threshold, dressed in a tailored black suit that accentuated his broad shoulders and lean frame. His dark hair was neatly styled, and his piercing blue eyes seemed to shine even brighter against the deep blue of his shirt. He looked devastatingly handsome. "Wow," he murmured, his gaze sweeping over her. "You look incredible." Eva felt a flush creep up her cheeks. "Thank you," she said softly, stepping aside to let him in. "You don't look so bad yourself." Adrian chuckled, his smile warm and genuine. "Shall we go?" "Where are we going?" she asked curiously as he led her to his car, a sleek, black sports car that seemed to purr with power. "It's a surprise," he replied with a wink, holding the door open for her. "But I promise, you'll love it." They drove through the city in comfortable silence, the twinkling lights of the skyline reflecting off the car's polished exterior. Eva found herself relaxing, the tension in her shoulders slowly easing as she listened to the soft hum of the engine. After a few minutes, they pulled up in front of a small, unassuming restaurant tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. The exterior was modest, almost nondescript, but there was a warm, inviting glow emanating from the windows. "What is this place?" Eva asked curiously as they stepped inside. "It's a little family-owned restaurant," Adrian explained, his gaze softening. "I've been coming here for years. The food is incredible, and the atmosphere is perfect if you want to get away from the hustle and bustle of the city." Eva glanced around, taking in the cozy decor and intimate ambience. The tables were adorned with simple white linens, and the soft glow of candlelight cast a romantic haze over the room. It was charming, understated, and completely unexpected. "I love it," she murmured, smiling up at him. "Thank you for bringing me here." "I'm glad," Adrian said softly, his eyes shining with sincerity. "I wanted tonight to be special." They were led to a secluded table by the window, the soft murmur of conversation and clinking of glasses creating a soothing backdrop. As they settled into their seats, Eva found herself relaxing even more, the anxiety that had plagued her earlier slowly dissipating. "This is nice," she admitted, her gaze meeting his. "I'm glad we're doing this." "Me too," Adrian murmured, his gaze warm and steady. "I meant what I said earlier, Eva. I want to get to know you. The real you." Eva hesitated, then took a deep breath. "Okay," she said softly. "But you have to let me get to know you too. No more hiding behind work or business talk. I want to know who Adrian Dawson really is." Adrian's lips twitched with amusement. "Fair enough. Ask me anything." She studied him for a moment, then leaned forward slightly, curiosity sparking in her eyes. "What made you want to become an architect?" Adrian's smile faded slightly, and he glanced out the window, his expression thoughtful. "My father," he said quietly. "He was an architect, too. One of the best. Growing up, I used to watch him sketch designs at the kitchen table late into the night. I loved the way he could take a blank piece of paper and turn it into something beautiful, something that would eventually become a reality." Eva nodded slowly, her gaze softening. "So you wanted to be like him?" "Yes and no," Adrian murmured, his voice tinged with a hint of sadness. "He was distant. Obsessed with his work, with building a legacy. He was brilliant, but he didn't have time for anything, or anyone, else. I admired his talent, but I promised myself I wouldn't become like him." "Did you keep that promise?" she asked softly, her heart aching at the pain she saw in his eyes. Adrian hesitated, then sighed. "Sometimes I think I'm failing," he admitted quietly. "I get caught up in the pressure, in the drive to succeed, and I forget what really matters. But I'm trying. I'm trying to be different. Eva reached across the table, gently placing her hand on his. It sounds like you're doing your best. That's all anyone can ask for. He looked down at their joined hands, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Thank you, Eva, he murmured. You don't know how much that means to me. They fell into a comfortable conversation after that, sharing stories and laughter as the evening wore on. Eva found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected, revealing bits and pieces of her past, her dreams, her fears. And Adrian listened, really listened, his gaze never leaving hers, his attention unwavering. It was intoxicating and terrifying. By the time dessert arrived, a decadent chocolate mousse that melted on her tongue, Eva felt lighter, freer. She couldn't remember the last time she'd enjoyed herself so much, or felt so connected to someone. As they finished their meal and prepared to leave, Adrian reached for her hand, his touch gentle and warm. Thank you for tonight, Eva, he murmured, his gaze intense. This meant a lot to me. Me too, she whispered, her heart fluttering. They stood there for a long moment, the world outside the restaurant fading into insignificance. And when Adrian leaned down and pressed a soft, lingering kiss to her lips, Eva felt something inside her shift, something fragile and beautiful breaking free. For the first time in a long while, she felt hopeful. Hopeful that maybe, just maybe, she could find something real. Something that would last. Entangled Desires, Part 3. Chapter 5, Past and Present Collide. Over the next few weeks, Eva and Adrian fell into a rhythm that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. They continued to see each other, their meetings evolving from casual dinners and coffee dates to deeper, more intimate conversations. The walls Eva had carefully built around herself began to crumble, bit by bit, as she let Adrian see more of the woman behind the designer, the woman who craved more than just success and recognition. But as much as Eva tried to immerse herself in the present, there were moments when the shadows of her past loomed over her. Memories of heartbreak, of betrayal, surfaced at unexpected times, leaving her feeling raw and exposed. And no matter how much she wanted to believe that this thing between her and Adrian could work, a part of her still feared that she was setting herself up for disappointment. One evening, as they sat together in Eva's apartment, the city lights casting a soft glow through the large windows, Adrian reached out and gently took her hand. Eva, he murmured, his gaze searching hers. What are you thinking about? She hesitated, glancing down at their intertwined fingers. I'm just wondering how we got here, she said softly. A few weeks ago, I never would have imagined us together like this. Is that a bad thing? Adrian asked, his voice low and steady. No, Eva whispered, shaking her head. It's not bad. It's just unexpected. And I'm not sure what to do with it. Adrian's gaze softened, and he leaned in, brushing a gentle kiss against her forehead. We don't have to do anything, he murmured. We can just be. Eva let out a soft sigh, leaning into his touch. I don't know how to just be, Adrian. I've spent so much of my life pushing forward, striving for the next goal, the next achievement. I don't know how to slow down. Then let me help you, he said quietly, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. Let me show you that it's okay to slow down, to take things one step at a time. She looked up at him, her heart aching with the intensity of her emotions. Why do you care so much? Adrian hesitated, his gaze turning contemplative. Because I know what it's like to be caught in that cycle, he murmured. To feel like you have to keep running just to stay ahead of your own doubts and fears. I see so much of myself in you, Eva. And I don't want you to burn out the way I almost did. Eva swallowed hard, her chest tightening. She wanted to believe him, to trust in the sincerity of his words, but a lingering doubt whispered in the back of her mind, a doubt that had been planted long ago by someone who had once promised her the world, only to leave her broken and disillusioned. What if I'm too damaged, she whispered, her voice trembling. What if I'm too messed up to let this work? Adrian's eyes darkened, and he reached up, cupping her face in his hands. You're not damaged, Eva, he said fiercely. You're strong. You're resilient. And you deserve to be happy. But what if I ruin it? She murmured, a tear slipping down her cheek. What if I push you away? Then I'll keep coming back, Adrian whispered, his thumb gently brushing the tear away. I'm not going anywhere, Eva. Not unless you tell me to. A sob caught in her throat, and she leaned into his embrace, burying her face against his chest. He held her tightly, his warmth and strength enveloping her, and for the first time in a long while, Eva let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have something real. Okay, she whispered, her voice muffled against his shirt. Okay. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped up in each other, the world outside fading into insignificance. And in that quiet, tender moment, Eva made a decision. She would let herself fall. And she would trust that Adrian would catch her. Chapter 6, The Rift. The following weeks were a whirlwind of passion and connection. Eva found herself looking forward to every moment she spent with Adrian, savoring the way he made her feel, alive, cherished, understood. Their relationship deepened, and for the first time in a long time, Eva allowed herself to hope for a future where she didn't have to choose between her career and her heart. But just as things were beginning to feel stable, the universe threw a curveball she hadn't anticipated. It was a chilly evening when Eva received a phone call that sent her world spinning. Hello? She answered, glancing at the clock. It was late, too late for a casual call. Her brow furrowed in confusion as she held the phone to her ear. Eva. It's Nathan. Eva's heart dropped at the sound of the voice she hadn't heard in years. Nathan, she breathed, disbelief and shock flooding through her. What do you want? There was a pause, and when Nathan spoke again, his voice was filled with a strange mix of regret and urgency. I need to see you. It's important. No, Eva said quickly, her grip tightening on the phone. We have nothing to talk about, Nathan. Not after what you did. I know I hurt you, Eva, he murmured, his voice pained. But please, just give me a chance to explain. I need to see you. It's about your designs. Someone's trying to sabotage your new collection. Eva's heart pounded wildly, a surge of panic coursing through her. What are you talking about? I can't explain over the phone, Nathan said urgently. Please, Eva. Meet me at the cafe on Maple Street. Just for a few minutes. She hesitated, her mind racing. This had to be some sort of trick, some ploy to get her back into his orbit. But the mention of her designs, the lifeblood of her career, made her pause. Fine, she said finally, her voice clipped. But if this is some kind of game, Nathan. It's not, he interrupted softly. I promise. The line went dead, and Eva stood there, her heart hammering in her chest. A part of her wanted to ignore the call, to brush it off as a desperate attempt by an ex-lover to worm his way back into her life. But another part of her, the part that couldn't afford to risk her career, told her she needed to hear him out. Taking a deep breath, she grabbed her coat and headed out the door. The cafe on Maple Street was a small, quaint establishment that she and Nathan had frequented during their brief, tumultuous relationship. Just stepping inside brought back a flood of memories, memories she tried so hard to bury. Nathan was already seated at a corner table, his posture tense, his gaze fixed on the door. When he saw her, his face softened, a look of relief washing over him. "Eva," he breathed, standing up as she approached. "Thank you for coming." "Make it quick, Nathan," she said curtly, crossing her arms over her chest. "What's this about my designs?" Nathan's expression turned serious, and he gestured for her to sit. Reluctantly, Eva took a seat across from him, her gaze wary. "I've been hearing things," he murmured, his voice low. "Whispers in the industry. Someone's been trying to sabotage your reputation, spreading rumors that your new collection is derivative, that you're losing your edge." Eva's heart clenched, anger and fear bubbling up inside her. "Who?" she demanded, her voice tight. "Who's saying this?" Nathan hesitated, then shook his head. "I don't know for sure. But I have a feeling it's someone close to you. Someone who wants to see you fail." Eva's mind spun, her thoughts racing. Could it be one of her competitors? Or worse, someone from her own team? "Why are you telling me this?" she asked softly, her gaze searching his. "Why do you care?" Nathan's expression turned pained, and he looked down at the table, his hands clenching into fists. "Because I owe you, Eva," he murmured. "I owe you for what I did, for how I hurt you. I want to make things right." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "You think you can just waltz back into my life and make things right? After everything?" "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," he said quietly, his gaze filled with regret. "But I'm not asking for that. I just want to help." Eva stared at him, her heart aching with a mixture of anger and confusion. She didn't trust him, not after the way he betrayed her, shattered her trust. But if what he was saying was true, she couldn't afford to ignore it. "Fine," she said finally, her voice cold. "I'll look into it. But don't think this means I'm forgiving you, Nathan." He nodded slowly, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "That's all I ask." Without another word, Eva stood up and turned to leave. But as she reached the door, she paused, glancing back over her shoulder. "Stay out of my life, Nathan," she said softly. "I don't need you." Nathan's smile faded, and he looked down, his shoulders slumping. "I know," he murmured. "I'm sorry, Eva. For everything." She didn't respond. She walked out of the cafe, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. And as she made her way back to her apartment, one thought kept echoing through her mind. Who could be trying to destroy her career? And what would happen if they succeeded? Entangled Desires, Part 4. Chapter 7, Shadows of Betrayal. The next morning, Eva woke up with a sense of foreboding. Nathan's warning had left her shaken, and she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was seriously wrong. If someone was indeed trying to sabotage her new collection, it meant that her professional life, everything she had worked so hard to build, was at risk. She spent the better part of the morning reviewing her designs and checking in with her team. Everyone seemed enthusiastic and focused, but that only heightened her unease. The thought that one of her trusted colleagues could be involved in undermining her made her stomach churn. "Hey, Eva, you look a little tense. Everything okay?" Lily, her assistant, asked as she handed over the day's schedule. "Yeah, I'm fine," Eva replied, forcing a smile. "Just a lot on my mind." Lily studied her for a moment, concern flickering in her eyes. "Well, if you need to talk, I'm here. You know that, right?" "I know," Eva said softly, her smile turning genuine. "Thank you, Lily. I appreciate it." Lily nodded, her expression brightening. "Anytime. And don't forget, we have the final fitting with our lead model for the show this afternoon. Should I confirm that everything is on schedule? Yes, please, Eva murmured, her thoughts drifting. And make sure the press is aware of our updated lineup. I want to avoid any confusion. Got it, Lily said cheerfully before heading off to handle the day's tasks. As soon as she was alone again, Eva's smile faded. She knew she couldn't let her suspicions show, not until she had something concrete. But the question remained, if someone was trying to sabotage her, who could it be? And why? Taking a deep breath, she reached for her phone and dialed the number of the one person who might have some answers. Adrian, she murmured when he picked up, relief washing over her at the sound of his voice. Can we talk? Of course, he replied immediately. What's going on? Not over the phone, she said quietly. Can you come to the studio? It's important. I'll be there in 15 minutes, he promised. True to his word, Adrian arrived at the studio within the quarter hour. Eva's heart raced as she led him to her private office, closing the door behind them. What's this about, Eva? He asked gently, his eyes searching hers. She hesitated, then took a deep breath. I got a call from someone last night, she began slowly. Someone from my past. Adrian's gaze sharpened. Who? Nathan, she murmured, the name tasting bitter on her tongue. He called to warn me that someone's trying to sabotage my new collection. He wouldn't say who, but I believe him, Adrian. I think something's going on. Adrian's jaw tightened, a flicker of anger flashing in his eyes. What does he want? To help, apparently, Eva said with a grim smile. He says he wants to make things right, but I'm not naive. I know he's not doing this out of the goodness of his heart. There's always an angle with Nathan. Do you think he's telling the truth? Adrian asked, his expression serious. I don't know, she admitted, frustration bubbling up inside her. But I can't afford to ignore it, not if it's true. Adrian's gaze softened, and he reached out, gently squeezing her hand. What do you want me to do, Eva? I'll help any way I can. She looked up at him, a sense of relief and gratitude washing over her. I don't know who to trust right now. I need you to help me keep an eye on things. If there's someone in my circle who's working against me, we need to find out who it is, before they do any more damage. Adrian nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. Okay. We'll figure this out, Eva. Together. Thank you, she whispered, squeezing his hand back. I don't know what I'd do without you. A faint smile tugged at his lips, and he leaned down, brushing a soft kiss against her forehead. You're not alone in this, Eva. I'm here. No matter what. They spent the next few hours going over the details of her collection, looking for any signs of tampering or leaks. But everything seemed in order, at least on the surface. Whoever was behind this was clever, careful. It made Eva's skin crawl to think that someone could be smiling at her one moment and plotting her downfall the next. I hate this, she muttered, rubbing a hand over her face. I hate feeling like I'm being watched, like I can't trust anyone. I know, Adrian said softly, his gaze filled with empathy. But we'll get to the bottom of it. I promise. Eva nodded, taking a deep breath to steady herself. I'm going to set up a meeting with the core team. Maybe if I put some pressure on them, I can get a read on who might be involved. Good idea, Adrian agreed. And if you need me there. No, Eva interrupted gently. This is something I have to handle on my own. But thank you, Adrian. Really? He looked like he wanted to argue, but he nodded reluctantly. Just be careful, okay? I will, she promised, offering him a reassuring smile. They parted ways shortly after, and Eva set about organizing the meeting. She called in her lead designer, Marissa, her operations manager, Paul, and Lily, who had been with her from the very beginning. As the three of them gathered in the conference room, Eva felt a pang of guilt. She didn't want to suspect any of them, but she had no choice. If Nathan was right, if there was a mole in her team, she needed to find out who it was, before it was too late. "Thank you all for coming," Eva began, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "I wanted to touch base about the upcoming launch and make sure everything is on track." "Of course, Eva," Marissa said warmly, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "The designs are looking incredible. We're all so excited for the show." "Everything's going smoothly on my end," Paul added, his tone confident. "We've got all the materials in place, and the logistics are sorted." "And I've been handling all the press communications," Lily chimed in, her smile genuine. "We're getting great feedback already." Eva nodded slowly, her gaze drifting over each of them. They all seemed so sincere, so invested. But that didn't mean anything. People could lie with a smile on their face and betrayal in their hearts. "Good," she said finally. "But I want to make sure there are no surprises. We've worked too hard to let anything go wrong now." "Is something bothering you, Eva?" Marissa asked softly, a hint of concern in her voice. "You seem tense." "I'm fine," Eva said quickly, forcing a smile. "Just a little on edge, I guess. I've put so much into this collection, and I want it to be perfect." "It will be," Paul assured her. "We've got your back, Eva." "Thank you," she murmured, her heart aching with uncertainty. "I appreciate that." The meeting wrapped up shortly after, and Eva watched as her team filed out, their expressions curious and thoughtful. She knew she hadn't given them much to go on, but that had been the point. She wanted to see if anyone reacted strangely, if anyone slipped up. But they hadn't. They'd all been perfect. And that only made her more suspicious. Chapter 8: Unraveling the Truth. The following days were a blur of tension and paranoia. Eva found herself second-guessing every interaction, every smile, every friendly gesture. She knew it wasn't fair to her team, but the fear of betrayal gnawed at her, making it impossible to trust anyone completely. Adrian continued to support her from the sidelines, his steady presence a source of comfort in the midst of the chaos. He checked in on her regularly, offering words of encouragement and a listening ear whenever she needed it. But even with his reassurance, Eva felt the weight of suspicion pressing down on her. One evening, as she sat alone in her studio, reviewing the latest sketches for the collection, her phone buzzed with a new message. "Unknown number, meet me at the old warehouse on 5th Avenue. Come alone. I have information you'll want to hear." Eva's heart skipped a beat, a sense of foreboding settling over her. This had to be connected to the sabotage. Someone knew something, and they were reaching out. But why the secrecy? And why a location as ominous as an abandoned warehouse? Taking a deep breath, she quickly texted Adrian, letting him know where she was going and asking him to stay nearby, just in case. "Adrian, are you sure about this, Eva?" "Eva, I have to go. I need answers." "Adrian, be careful. I'm here if you need me." With a sense of resolve, Eva grabbed her coat and made her way to the address. The warehouse was dark and foreboding, the only light coming from a single street lamp casting long, eerie shadows across the cracked pavement. She hesitated at the entrance, every instinct screaming at her to turn back. But she squared her shoulders and stepped inside, the sound of her footsteps echoing in the empty space. "Hello?" she called out, her voice trembling slightly. "Is anyone here?" Silence greeted her. She glanced around, her eyes straining to see through the darkness. And then, out of the shadows, a figure stepped forward. "Eva," the man murmured, his voice low and familiar. Eva's breath caught in her throat, and she took an involuntary step back. "Nathan," she whispered, her heart pounding. "What are you doing here?" He took a step closer, his expression somber. "I told you, Eva. I'm trying to help." She shook her head, confusion and fear swirling inside her. "Help? By meeting me in a place like this?" "What's going on, Nathan?" "There's something you need to know," he said quietly, his gaze intense. "Something about Adrian." Eva frowned, her heart skipping a beat. "What are you talking about?" Nathan took a deep breath, his expression grave. "Adrian's not who you think he is. He's been hiding something from you. And if you don't believe me, ask him about the old partnership deal he made with your biggest competitor. Ask him what really happened." Eva stared at him, shock and disbelief flooding through her. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "You're lying. Adrian would never." "Ask him," Nathan interrupted softly. "And when he can't give you a straight answer, remember that I tried to warn you." Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving Eva standing there, her mind reeling. Adrian had betrayed her. It couldn't be true. Could it? Entangled Desires, Part 5. Chapter 9, Broken Trust. Eva stumbled out of the warehouse, her mind spinning with confusion and disbelief. Nathan's words echoed in her ears, fueling a storm of emotions she couldn't control. "Adrian's not who you think he is." The accusation felt like a dagger to her heart. She wanted to dismiss it as a lie, a desperate attempt by Nathan to sow discord and drag her back into his toxic web. But a part of her, small, fragile, yet persistent, couldn't ignore the fear that maybe, just maybe, there was some truth in his warning. By the time she reached her car, her hands were shaking so badly that she could barely get the keys into the ignition. Taking a deep breath, she closed her eyes and tried to steady herself. This was ridiculous. Adrian wasn't like Nathan. He'd never lied to her, never given her a reason to doubt him. He'd been nothing but supportive and caring since they'd started this whirlwind relationship. But Nathan's voice, calm and unyielding, kept replaying in her mind. Ask him about the old partnership deal. Ask him what really happened. "What deal?" she whispered to herself, her throat tightening. "What is he talking about?" There was only one way to find out. With a surge of determination, she picked up her phone and dialed Adrian's number. He answered almost immediately, his voice filled with concern. "Eva. Is everything okay? Where are you?" "I need to see you," she said quickly, her voice sharper than she intended. "Now." There was a brief pause, then Adrian's voice softened. "Of course. Where are you?" "I'll come to you." "No," she said firmly. "I'll come to your place. We need to talk." "Okay," he agreed quietly. "I'll be waiting." The drive to Adrian's apartment felt endless. By the time she pulled up outside the sleek, modern building, her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst. She made her way to his floor, her footsteps echoing ominously in the empty hallway. When she reached his door, she hesitated, her hand hovering over the doorbell. "You have to do this, Eva," she told herself firmly. "You need answers." Taking a deep breath as she pressed the doorbell. Adrian opened the door almost immediately, his expression tense and worried. "Eva," he murmured, reaching for her. "What happened?" "You sounded. Is it true?" she blurted out, stepping back before he could touch her. "Is what Nathan said true?" Adrian froze, his gaze darkening. "What did Nathan say?" Eva swallowed hard, struggling to keep her voice steady. He said you've been hiding something from me. That you had some kind of deal with my competitor." "Is that true, Adrian? Did you betray me?" Adrian's face paled, and he took a step back, his expression conflicted. "Eva, just tell me the truth," she cried, her voice breaking. "Did you or did you not make a deal with them?" He hesitated, then closed his eyes, a pained expression crossing his face. "Yes," he whispered finally. "But it's not what you think." "What am I supposed to think?" she interrupted, anger and hurt flooding through her. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it happened years ago," he said desperately, his voice thick with emotion. "Before I even knew you. I was young, ambitious, reckless. I got involved in a partnership deal with them, but I pulled out as soon as I realized what they were doing. It had nothing to do with you, Eva. I never wanted to hurt you." Eva stared at him, her heart aching with betrayal. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered, tears stinging her eyes. "Why didn't you say something when we first started working together?" "Because I was afraid," he admitted quietly. "Afraid that you'd think I was just like them. That you'd see me as another rival instead of someone who wants to be with you, who cares about you. And now I do see you as that," she murmured, her voice trembling. "I see you as someone who lied to me. Someone who hid something important from me." "Eva, please," Adrian pleaded, his gaze filled with anguish. "Don't do this. I'm not your enemy. I'm on your side, I swear. Whatever Nathan told you, he's twisting things to turn you against me. He's trying to manipulate you." "But what if he's right?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "What if you're the one manipulating me?" Adrian's face crumpled, and he took a step closer, his hands reaching out desperately. "I'm not, Eva. I swear on everything I care about, I'm not. Please, please believe me." She shook her head, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "I don't know what to believe anymore, Adrian. I don't know if I can trust you." "Don't say that," he whispered, his voice raw. "Don't let him win, Eva. Don't let him destroy what we have." "I'm not letting anyone win," she murmured, her heart breaking. I'm just trying to protect myself." "Then let me help you," he begged, his voice filled with desperation. "Let me prove to you that I'm not lying, that I'm not like him." Eva stared at him, the pain and confusion swirling inside her. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust him, to let herself fall back into his arms and forget everything else. But the fear of being hurt, of being betrayed again, was too strong. "I can't," she whispered, taking a step back. "I need time. I need to figure this out on my own." "Eva, please," Adrian started, but she shook her head, cutting him off. "I'm sorry, Adrian," she said softly, her voice thick with tears. I need space." Before he could say anything else, she turned and walked away, her heart shattering with every step she took. She could feel his eyes on her, could hear the faint sound of his breath hitching as she left. And as she reached the elevator and pressed the button to go down, she allowed herself one last, fleeting glance over her shoulder. Adrian stood in the doorway, his expression broken, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The sight of him like that, so vulnerable, so devastated, almost made her turn back. But she didn't. Because she knew that if she did, she might never be able to walk away again. Chapter 10: A Painful Truth. The days that followed were some of the longest and most agonizing of Eva's life. She threw herself into her work, using it as a distraction from the pain and confusion that had settled over her like a dark cloud. She avoided Adrian's calls and texts, her heart aching every time his name flashed on her phone. But no matter how much she tried to distance herself, she couldn't escape the memories, the feel of his arms around her, the warmth of his smile, the way his eyes had looked at her like she was the most important person in the world. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face, heard his voice, felt the ghost of his touch. And it was killing her. She knew she had to make a decision, either let him back in or walk away for good. But the fear of being hurt, of being lied to again, held her back, paralyzing her with indecision. One evening, as she sat alone in her studio, a soft knock at the door startled her out of her thoughts. Frowning, she stood up and opened the door, her heart racing when she saw who stood on the other side. "Nathan," she murmured, surprise and wariness flooding through her. "What are you doing here?" "I had to see you," he said softly, his gaze filled with concern. "I heard about what happened with Adrian. Are you okay?" Eva's eyes narrowed, suspicion flaring inside her. "How do you know about that?" Nathan hesitated, then sighed. "Word gets around, Eva. You know how this industry is. People talk." "People talk," she repeated flatly, her gaze hard. "Or did you have something to do with it?" "What?" Nathan asked, his eyes widening. "No, of course not. I would never, don't lie to me," she interrupted, her voice shaking with anger. "Did you know about Adrian's past deal before you called me? Did you come to me that night just to plant doubts in my mind?" Nathan's expression turned pained, and he looked away, his shoulders slumping. "I didn't want to hurt you, Eva," he murmured. "But you needed to know the truth." "The truth?" she demanded, her voice rising. "Or your version of it?" "Both," he said quietly, his gaze flicking back to hers. "I didn't lie to you, Eva. I told you what I knew because I didn't want you to get blindsided. But I also didn't tell you everything." "What do you mean?" she asked sharply, a sense of dread settling over her. Nathan took a deep breath, then met her gaze, his expression somber. "There's something else about Adrian. Something I think you need to know." Eva's heart pounded, a mix of fear and anticipation swirling inside her. "What?" He didn't just back out of the deal," Nathan said slowly. "He used it to gain leverage, to position himself in the industry. He betrayed people, Eva. People who trusted him." "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "You're lying." "I wish I were," Nathan murmured, his gaze filled with regret. "But I'm not." "I'm sorry, Eva. I know you care about him. But you deserve to know the truth." Eva stared at him, her mind spinning. Could it really be true? Could Adrian have used his past deal to manipulate people, to betray them for his own gain? And if it was true, could she ever forgive him? Entangled Desires, Part 6. Chapter 11: Confronting the Past. Eva spent the next few days in a haze of confusion and heartache, torn between her feelings for Adrian and the horrifying possibility that Nathan's words might be true. She went through the motions of her daily routine, meeting with her team, reviewing designs, finalizing details for the upcoming show, but it all felt like she was moving underwater, everything muted and distant. Each time her phone buzzed with a message or a missed call from Adrian, a fresh wave of pain crashed over her. She knew she couldn't keep avoiding him forever, not if she wanted answers. But the fear of what she might discover kept her frozen in place. It wasn't until Lily, her ever-supportive assistant, gently nudged her that Eva realized she couldn't keep running. "Eva," Lily said softly one afternoon, her gaze filled with concern. "You've been distracted lately. Are you sure everything's okay?" Eva forced a smile, but it felt brittle and false. "I'm fine, Lily. Just stressed about the collection, I guess." Lily's brow furrowed, and she leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "I know it's not my place, but if something's wrong, you can talk to me. You don't have to go through it alone." Eva's smile wavered, and she looked away, her chest tightening with a rush of gratitude and sadness. Lily was more than just an employee, she was a friend, someone who had stood by her through thick and thin. But this was something Eva needed to face on her own. "Thank you, Lily," she murmured, her voice soft. "I appreciate it. Really." Lily nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "Just don't lose yourself in this, okay? You've worked too hard, come too far, to let anyone, derail you." Eva's heart clenched, and she nodded, the weight of Lily's words settling heavily on her shoulders. "I won't," she promised, even though she wasn't entirely sure she believed it herself. That evening, after everyone else had left the studio, Eva made a decision. She couldn't keep living in this state of uncertainty, trapped between love and doubt. If she wanted to move forward, no matter what that looked like, she needed to confront Adrian. She needed to hear the truth from his own lips, to know once and for all what kind of man he really was. With a sense of resolve, she grabbed her coat and headed for the door. Adrian's apartment building loomed ahead of her, its sleek, modern lines casting long shadows in the fading light. She hesitated at the entrance, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. But she forced herself to push forward, stepping inside and making her way to his floor. When she reached his door, she took a deep breath, then raised her hand and knocked. A few moments later, the door swung open, and there he was, Adrian, his expression a mixture of surprise and hope. "Eva," he murmured, his voice soft. I didn't think you'd come." "I need to talk to you," she said quietly, her gaze steady despite the turmoil inside her. "Can I come in?" "Of course," he replied quickly, stepping aside to let her enter. "Come in." The moment she stepped inside, the familiar scent of his cologne wrapped around her, making her heart ache with longing and uncertainty. She glanced around the apartment, taking in the warm, inviting space that she had grown to know so well over the past few weeks. "Eva," Adrian began gently, his voice filled with concern. "What's going on? You've been avoiding me." "I've been worried." Eva swallowed hard, her gaze flicking to his, searching his eyes for any sign of deception. "I need you to be honest with me, Adrian," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I need you to tell me the truth about your past. About the deal you made, and what happened afterward." Adrian's face tightened, a shadow crossing his eyes. He glanced away, his jaw clenching. "Eva, don't lie to me," she interrupted, her voice breaking. "Please, Adrian. Just tell me the truth." There was a long, tense silence, and when Adrian finally looked back at her, his expression was filled with pain and regret. "It's true," he whispered, his voice barely more than a breath. "I did make a deal with your competitor. And I did use it to gain leverage. But, Eva, I swear, I didn't know how it would affect you. I didn't know I would end up meeting you, falling for you. I never meant for it to happen this way." Eva felt as though the ground had been ripped out from under her. The confirmation of her worst fears hit her like a punch to the gut, leaving her breathless and disoriented. "You used people, Adrian," she murmured, tears welling in her eyes. "You lied to them, betrayed them, and you kept it from me. How am I supposed to trust you after that?" "Eva, please," he begged, his voice breaking with desperation. "I was young. Stupid. I made mistakes, but I'm not that man anymore. I've spent every day since trying to be better, to do better. I love you, Eva. I would never do anything to hurt you." "But you did," she whispered, her tears spilling over. "You did hurt me. By not telling me. By letting me believe that you were someone I could trust." Adrian took a step closer, his eyes pleading. "Please, Eva. Give me a chance to prove that I'm not that man anymore. Let me show you that I've changed, that I can be the man you deserve." Eva stared at him, her heart breaking into 1,000 pieces. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust him, to let him back into her life. But the pain of his betrayal, the fear of being hurt again, was too strong. "I don't know if I can," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way." Adrian's face crumpled, and he took another step forward, his hands reaching out desperately. "Eva, please," but she shook her head, stepping back, her tears blurring her vision. "I need time," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "I need time to think. To figure out what I want." "Okay," Adrian whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here. Waiting. I'm not going anywhere, Eva. I love you. No matter what." Without another word, Eva turned and walked out of his apartment, her heart shattering with every step she took. And as the door closed behind her, she knew that no matter what happened next, nothing would ever be the same again. Chapter 12: The Fallout. The days that followed were a blur of pain and numbness. Eva threw herself into her work, using it as a shield to keep the world, and her emotions, at bay. She spent long hours at the studio, reviewing designs, overseeing fittings, and ensuring that everything was perfect for the upcoming show. But no matter how hard she tried to focus, the memory of her confrontation with Adrian lingered like a dark cloud over her, casting a shadow over every moment. Lily, ever perceptive, noticed the change in her demeanor, but Eva deflected her questions with polite smiles and vague reassurances. She couldn't talk about it, not yet. Not when the wounds were still so raw. It wasn't until a few days before the show that things took an unexpected turn. Eva was in the middle of a final fitting with her lead model when her phone buzzed with a new message. Frowning, she glanced at the screen, her heart skipping a beat when she saw the name. "Nathan, meet me at the park tonight. I have something you need to see. A surge of anger and frustration swept through her. What did Nathan want now? Hadn't he caused enough damage already? But as much as she wanted to ignore him, a part of her, the part that craved answers, that needed to understand, knew she couldn't. Taking a deep breath, she quickly texted back. Eva, fine. I'll be there at 8. When she arrived at the park that evening, the sun was just beginning to set, casting a warm, golden glow over the trees and casting long shadows on the ground. She made her way to the bench Nathan had specified, her heart pounding with a mixture of anger and anticipation. Nathan was already there, his posture tense, his gaze fixed on something in the distance. When he saw her approaching, he stood up, his expression wary. Eva, he murmured, his voice soft. Thank you for coming. Get to the point, Nathan, she said curtly, crossing her arms over her chest. What do you want? He hesitated, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small flash drive. I have something you need to see. Eva's eyes narrowed, suspicion flaring inside her. What is it? Proof, he said quietly. Proof that Adrian isn't who he says he is. Her heart skipped a beat, a sense of dread settling over her. What kind of proof? Watch it and see for yourself, Nathan murmured, his gaze filled with regret. I'm sorry, Eva. I really am. Without another word, he handed her the flash drive and turned to leave. Eva stood there, the flash drive clutched tightly in her hand, her mind racing. What could possibly be on it? What kind of proof could Nathan have that would change everything? Taking a deep breath, she turned and made her way back to her car. She needed to know. She needed to see it for herself. And whatever happened next, she would deal with it. Because she couldn't keep living in this state of uncertainty, trapped between love and betrayal. It was time to face the truth. Entangled Desires, Part 7. Chapter 13, Unveiling the Truth. Eva sat in front of her laptop, her heart pounding wildly as she inserted the flash drive into the USB port. The cursor hovered over the single video file on the screen, a file labeled simply Proof. She hesitated, her hand trembling as fear and anticipation warred within her. What would she see? What would this video reveal about Adrian? With a deep breath, she clicked on the file. The screen flickered, and a grainy video began to play. The footage was dark and a little shaky, as if it had been recorded from a hidden camera. Eva leaned forward, her eyes widening as she recognized the setting, the conference room of a luxury office building. And there, standing at the head of the table, was Adrian. He looked younger, his hair slightly longer, his suit crisply tailored. But it was definitely him. He was talking to a group of men and women seated around the table, his expression serious, his tone clipped and authoritative. Securing this deal is crucial, Adrian was saying, his voice clear through the speakers. If we're going to take down Monroe Designs, we need to move quickly. We can't give them time to recover. Eva's breath caught in her throat, her heart lurching painfully. Take down Monroe Designs. He couldn't be talking about her, could he? The camera angle shifted slightly, focusing on a man at the other end of the table, one of her fiercest competitors, Charles Delaney. He had a smug smile on his face, his gaze fixed on Adrian. And you're sure you can deliver? Charles asked, his voice dripping with condescension. Adrian's jaw tightened, his expression hard. Yes, I can deliver. I know their weaknesses. I know how they operate. We can hit them where it hurts." The room buzzed with murmurs of approval, and Eva felt her stomach twitch with nausea. This couldn't be happening. This had to be some kind of mistake. Adrian would never, but then the video continued, and Eva's heart shattered with each word that came out of his mouth. "I've already started feeding misinformation to their suppliers," Adrian continued coldly. "By the time they realize what's happening, it'll be too late. Their production lines will be in chaos, and they'll lose credibility with their clients." Charles let out a low chuckle, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "Well done, Dawson. With you on our side, Monroe Designs won't stand a chance." The screen went black, the video ending abruptly. Eva sat there, staring at the empty screen, her mind numb with shock. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. It was true. Every word Nathan had said, every warning he'd given her, it was all true. Adrian had betrayed her. He had plotted against her, tried to destroy everything she had built. And he had never told her. Hot tears blurred her vision, and she let out a choked sob, pressing her hand to her mouth. How could he have done this to her? How could he have lied to her, pretended to care about her, when all along he had been working to bring her down? Anger flared within her, scorching away the pain and sorrow. She stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor as she shoved it back. She needed to confront him. She needed to hear him say it, to see his face when she confronted him with the truth. Grabbing her coat, she stormed out of her apartment, the video file still playing in her mind like a haunting nightmare. It wasn't long before she found herself standing outside Adrian's apartment building, her heart pounding with fury and betrayal. She didn't even bother to knock, she pounded on the door, her fists shaking with rage. "Adrian," she shouted, her voice echoing in the empty hallway. "Open the door. Now!" A few moments later, the door swung open, and there he was, Adrian, his expression confused and concerned. "Eva," he murmured, reaching out to her. "What's wrong? What happened?" "Don't touch me," she hissed, stepping back, her eyes blazing with anger. "How could you? How could you lie to me like that?" Adrian's brow furrowed, confusion clouding his gaze. "Lie to you? Eva, what are you talking about?" "I saw it," she spat, her voice trembling with fury. "I saw the video. The one where you sat there and plotted to destroy my company. The one where you said you knew our weaknesses, that you'd feed misinformation to our suppliers. Wait, Eva, don't you dare deny it," she screamed, her chest heaving. "I saw it with my own eyes, Adrian. How could you do that to me? How could you pretend to care about me when all along you were just using me?" Adrian's face drained of color, his expression one of shock and horror. "Eva, save it," as she snapped, hot tears spilling down her cheeks. "I trusted you. I let you in, and this is what you do. You try to ruin everything I've worked for." "Please, Eva, listen to me," Adrian pleaded, his voice desperate. "It's not what you think, not what I think," she interrupted, her voice breaking. "You were working with Charles Delaney. You were trying to destroy my company. How could it be anything other than what it looks like?" Adrian took a deep, shuddering breath, his gaze locked on hers. "Yes, I was working with Delaney," he admitted quietly. "But it was a long time ago, before I knew you. Before I realized what kind of man he was." Eva shook her head, disbelief and anger warring within her. "You're lying." "I'm not," he whispered, his voice filled with pain. "I ended that partnership as soon as I realized what he was planning. I tried to back out, but by then, it was too late." "I had already what?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "Already sabotaged my company. Already betrayed me." Adrian's shoulders slumped, and he looked away, his expression filled with anguish. "Yes," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "But, Eva, I regretted it every day since. I tried to make it right." "I tried to make it right," she repeated incredulously. "You think you can just apologize and everything will be fine?" "No," he said quietly, his gaze meeting hers. "I know I can't. But I was hoping. I was hoping that you would understand. That you would give me a chance to prove that I'm not that man anymore." Eva stared at him, her heart breaking all over again. "I don't even know who you are, Adrian," she whispered, tears blurring her vision. "I thought I knew you, but I was wrong." "Please, Eva," he begged, his voice raw. "Don't walk away. Not like this. Let me explain, let me." "I can't," she whispered, shaking her head. "I can't do this anymore. I can't be with someone I can't trust." "Eva," he whispered, his eyes filled with desperation. "I love you. I love you more than I've ever loved anyone. Please, don't leave me." Her heart shattered at the raw pain in his voice, but she forced herself to turn away, her shoulders trembling with the effort. "Goodbye, Adrian," she murmured, her voice breaking. "I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for." Without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving Adrian standing alone in the doorway, his expression one of utter devastation. And as she stepped into the elevator and the doors slid shut, Eva felt something inside her break, something fragile and beautiful that she had tried so hard to protect. But it was gone now, shattered beyond repair. And she had no idea how to pick up the pieces. Chapter 14. Picking up the pieces. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest of Eva's life. She buried herself in work, throwing all her energy into perfecting her collection for the upcoming show. It was the only way she knew how to cope, with her hands busy, her mind focused on something other than the pain that had become her constant companion. The press buzzed with rumors about her split with Adrian, and whispers of his past involvement with Charles Delaney circulated throughout the industry. But Eva ignored it all, shutting out the noise and focusing solely on her designs. Lily stayed by her side, offering quiet support without pushing for answers. Eva was grateful for that, grateful that Lily understood her need for space, for time to heal. The night of the show arrived, and Eva found herself standing backstage, watching as her models took their places. The lights were bright, the music pulsed through the air, and the audience buzzed with anticipation. But for the first time in her career, Eva felt empty. There was no excitement, no thrill at seeing her designs come to life. Just a hollow ache that refused to go away. "Eva," Lily murmured, stepping up beside her. "It's time." Eva nodded slowly, taking a deep breath to steady herself. She forced a smile, though it felt stiff and unnatural. "Let's do this." The show went off without a hitch. The audience applauded, the reviews were glowing, and her collection was hailed as one of her best yet. But as Eva stood on stage, accepting the applause with a gracious smile, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. She had achieved everything she'd ever wanted: success, recognition, acclaim. But it felt hollow, meaningless, without the person she had once thought would share it all with her. As the applause died down and the crowd began to disperse, Eva slipped backstage, her heart heavy. She had made the right decision in walking away from Adrian. She knew that. She couldn't be with someone she couldn't trust, no matter how much she loved him. But that didn't make it any less painful. And as she stood alone in the empty dressing room, staring at her reflection in the mirror, she wondered if she would ever be able to fill the void that Adrian had left behind. Entangled Desires, Part 8. Chapter 15, Healing Wounds. After the show's success, the industry buzzed with talk of Eva's brilliance and creativity, but for Eva herself, the accolades felt like nothing more than empty words. As she watched her designs being celebrated and her brand's reputation solidify, she felt a sense of disconnect. It was as if a veil had fallen between her and the world around her, a veil woven from the threads of heartbreak and disappointment. The weeks passed, each day blurring into the next as she threw herself into work, determined to keep moving forward. She attended meetings, designed new concepts, and expanded her brand's reach, but none of it filled the void that Adrian's absence had left behind. And then one day, Eva received an unexpected visitor. It was a gray, rainy afternoon when Lily knocked on her office door, peeking in with a curious expression. "Eva, there's someone here to see you," she said softly. "He says well, I think you should come see for yourself." Eva frowned, confusion flickering in her eyes. She hadn't scheduled any meetings, and after everything that had happened, she'd been careful about limiting her interactions with people outside of her team. Who would show up unannounced? Curiosity piqued, she followed Lily down the hall and into the reception area. Her heart stuttered when she saw who was waiting for her. "Nathan?" she murmured, surprise and wariness lacing her voice. "What are you doing here?" Nathan turned at the sound of her voice, his expression unreadable. He looked different, older, wearier, as if the past few months had taken a toll on him, too. "Eva," he greeted quietly, his gaze steady. "I'm sorry to show up like this, but I needed to talk to you." She crossed her arms over her chest, her stance defensive. "Why? What more could you possibly have to say?" Nathan's eyes softened, a hint of regret flickering in their depths. "I wanted to apologize," he said softly. "For everything. For the way I came back into your life, for the way I blindsided you with the truth about Adrian. I didn't handle it well, and I know I caused you a lot of pain." Eva blinked, taken aback by his words. This was not the Nathan she remembered, the cocky, self-assured man who had never admitted fault or taken responsibility for his actions. "What's changed?" she asked warily, her gaze searching his face. He let out a long, slow breath, his shoulders slumping slightly. "I realized that I was wrong, Eva. I was wrong to come between you and Adrian. I was so caught up in my own resentment, my own desire to get back at him for everything, that I didn't stop to think about how it would affect you." Eva's brow furrowed, confusion and suspicion warring within her. "What are you talking about? What resentment?" Nathan hesitated, then looked away, his expression pained. "Adrian and we have a complicated history. He and I were once friends, close friends. But then he got that deal with Delaney, and things fell apart. I felt betrayed. I thought he was choosing success over loyalty, over friendship. And I wanted to get back at him. I thought that if I could turn you against him, if I could expose what he'd done, it would, I don't know, make me feel better." Eva stared at him, shock and disbelief swirling inside her. "You used me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You used me to get back at him." Nathan's eyes widened, his expression filled with regret. "No, Eva. That's not." "Yes, it is," she interrupted, her voice rising. "You came to me, you planted doubts in my mind, and you tore us apart. And for what? Revenge?" "Eva, please," he pleaded, taking a step closer. "I know I made mistakes. I know I hurt you. But I'm trying to make it right now. I'm not here to cause more pain, I'm here to apologize. I'm here to tell you the truth." "What truth?" she demanded, her chest tightening. Nathan swallowed hard, his gaze steady. "The truth is that Adrian loves you, Eva. He always has. Everything he did back then, it wasn't about you. It wasn't even about the business. It was about survival. He was trying to protect himself, to make sure he wouldn't be taken advantage of by people like Delaney. And yes, he made mistakes, big ones. But he's not that man anymore." Eva's heart pounded wildly, a mix of anger and hope swirling inside her. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I can see how much you're hurting," Nathan murmured, his voice soft. "And because I know that deep down, you still care about him. I wanted to give you the chance to hear the whole story. To make your own decision." She stared at him, her mind racing. Could she believe him? Could she trust that what he was saying was genuine, that this wasn't just another attempt to manipulate her? "I don't know if I can forgive you, Nathan," she whispered, her voice breaking. He nodded slowly, his expression resigned. "I understand. And I don't expect you to. But I wanted you to know. I'm truly sorry, Eva. For everything." There was a long, tense silence, and then Nathan turned and walked away, leaving Eva standing alone in the empty reception area, her heart pounding. His words echoed in her mind, stirring up a whirlwind of emotions she tried so hard to bury. Could it be true? Could Adrian really have done all those things out of desperation, out of fear, rather than malice? She needed to know. She needed to talk to Adrian, to hear his side of the story, without the anger, without the hurt clouding her judgment. Taking a deep breath, she reached for her phone and dialed the number she had promised herself she would never call again. The line rang once, twice, and then, "Eva." Adrian's voice, raw and filled with hope, came through the line. Her heart skipped a beat, her breath catching in her throat. "Adrian, I need to see you." There was a brief pause, and then his voice softened. "I'm here. I'll be waiting." Chapter 16, A Chance to Heal. When Eva arrived at Adrian's apartment, the sky was overcast, a light drizzle falling from the clouds above. It felt fitting, somehow, this quiet, somber weather that matched the tumult of emotions churning inside her. She took a deep breath, her heart pounding as she knocked on the door. A few moments later, Adrian opened it, his gaze filled with a mixture of surprise and hope. "Eva," he murmured softly, his voice tinged with disbelief. "You came." "I did," she whispered, her gaze locking onto his. "We need to talk." He nodded slowly, stepping aside to let her in. The familiar scent of his cologne, the warmth of his presence, it all hit her at once, overwhelming her senses. They settled onto the couch, a tense silence hanging between them. Eva took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she looked down at them. "Nathan came to see me," she began quietly. Adrian's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. "What did he say?" He apologized," she murmured, shaking her head as if she couldn't quite believe it. "He told me that he had been using me to get back at you. That everything he did was out of resentment. He admitted that he was wrong." Adrian's gaze softened, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. "He did?" "Yes," she whispered, looking up to meet his eyes. "And he told me something else. He said that you weren't trying to hurt me. That everything you did back then was about survival." Adrian swallowed hard, his gaze steady. "It's true, Eva. I made mistakes. I hurt people I cared about. But I wasn't trying to destroy you, I swear. When I took that deal with Delaney, I was desperate. I didn't realize the full extent of what I was getting myself into until it was too late. By the time I tried to back out, I was already in too deep." Eva's heart clenched, the pain of his betrayal still fresh, but something in his voice, something raw and vulnerable, gave her pause. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Why didn't you say something when we first met, when we first started getting close?" "Because I was afraid," Adrian admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "Afraid that you'd see me as nothing more than a liar and a cheat. Afraid that you'd walk away before I even had the chance to show you who I really am." "But you lied anyway," she murmured, her eyes filling with tears. "You kept it from me. You let me believe that you were different, that I could trust you." "I know," he whispered, his gaze filled with regret. "And I'm sorry, Eva. I'm so sorry. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know that I love you. I've always loved you. And I would do anything, to make this right." Eva stared at him, her heart aching with a mixture of love and pain. She wanted to believe him, to trust in the sincerity of his words, but the fear of being hurt again held her back. "I don't know if I could trust you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way." Adrian's shoulders slumped, a look of devastation crossing his face. "I understand," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "But I'm not going to give up, Eva. I'm not going to stop fighting for you, for us. Even if it takes the rest of my life." Tears spilled down Eva's cheeks, and she looked away, her chest tightening. She wanted to reach out, to hold him, to let herself believe that they could somehow find their way back to each other. But she couldn't. Not yet. "I need time," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I need time to figure out if I can ever forgive you. If I can ever let you back in." Adrian nodded slowly, his gaze filled with pain and hope. "Take all the time you need," he murmured. "I'll wait. For as long as it takes." They sat there in silence, the weight of their shared history hanging heavy between them. And as Eva stood up to leave, her heart aching with every step, she knew that this was just the beginning. The beginning of healing. The beginning of forgiveness. The beginning of finding their way back to each other. Entangled Desires, Part 9. Chapter 17, Slow Rebuilding. The weeks that followed were a delicate balancing act for Eva. Every day, she fought to keep her emotions in check, to process the tangled mess of feelings she still had for Adrian. He kept his distance, respecting her request for space, but he never stopped reaching out with small gestures, a bouquet of her favorite flowers left at the studio, a handwritten note of apology slipped under her door, or a quiet presence during her public events, supporting her from the shadows. And with each gesture, Eva felt her resolve waver just a little bit more. It wasn't that she had forgiven him. Far from it. But the pain and anger that had consumed her in the immediate aftermath of the revelation were slowly being replaced by a deep, aching sadness. She missed him. Missed his laugh, his touch, the way he'd look at her as if she were the most important person in the world. But trust was a fragile thing. And once broken, it was difficult to rebuild. One rainy afternoon, Eva found herself standing outside a small cafe tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. She'd been here before. This had been their place, a refuge where they'd spent lazy Sundays sipping coffee and talking about everything and nothing. The memories were bittersweet now, tinged with a sense of loss that lingered like a shadow over her heart. With a sigh, she stepped inside, the soft chime of the bell above the door announcing her presence. The cafe was almost empty, the only other patron a lone figure sitting in the corner by the window. Her heart skipped a beat when she realized who it was. Adrian. He looked up as she approached, surprise flickering across his face before it softened into something warmer, something more hopeful. Eva, he murmured, standing up. I didn't expect to see you here. I didn't expect to come, she admitted quietly, her gaze steady. But I think we need to talk. Adrian's eyes searched hers, his expression a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Of course. Please, sit. She settled into the seat opposite him, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. There was so much she wanted to say, so much she needed to understand. But where could she even begin? I don't know why I'm here, she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. I don't know if I'm ready to forgive you, or if I'll ever be able to trust you again. But I miss you, Adrian. I miss us. His gaze darkened with emotion, and he reached out hesitantly, his hand hovering over hers. Eva, I'm not saying we can go back to the way things were, she interrupted gently, shaking her head. I'm not sure if that's even possible. But I want to try to understand. I want to know why. Adrian's shoulders slumped, and he looked down, his expression filled with pain and regret. Because I was scared, he whispered, his voice hoarse. I was scared of losing everything I'd worked for. Scared of being taken advantage of. I thought that if I could get the upper hand, I'd be safe. But I was wrong. So wrong. Eva swallowed hard, her heart aching at the raw honesty in his voice. You hurt me, she murmured, her voice thick with unshed tears. You broke my trust, Adrian. I know, he whispered, his gaze meeting hers, filled with a desperate kind of sincerity. And I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But I want to make it right, Eva. I want to prove to you that I can be better. That I can be the man you deserve. Eva stared at him, the weight of his words pressing down on her. Could she believe him? Could she let herself hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward for them? I don't know if I can ever forget what you did, she whispered, her voice trembling. But I want to try. I want to see if we can find a way to move past this. Together. Adrian's eyes shone with unshed tears, and he nodded slowly, his hand reaching out to gently cover hers. "I'll wait as long as it takes, Eva. I'll do whatever it takes to earn your trust again." They sat there in silence for a long moment, their hands resting together on the table. And as the rain continued to fall softly against the window, Eva felt a tiny spark of hope flicker to life in her heart. It was fragile, tentative, but it was there. Maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild what had been broken. Chapter 18: Steps Toward Healing. Over the next few months, Eva and Adrian began the slow, delicate process of rebuilding their relationship. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, of hesitation, of fear that they were making a mistake. But with each small step they took toward each other, the walls that had risen between them started to crumble. They began meeting for coffee once a week, their conversations cautious but genuine. They talked about their work, their dreams, the things that mattered to them. There was an unspoken agreement to avoid the topic of their past, to focus instead on building a foundation for something new. It wasn't the sweeping romance they'd once shared, but it was real. Honest. And that, Eva realized, was what she needed most. One evening, as they strolled through the city park, the crisp autumn air swirling leaves around them, Adrian turned to her, his expression tentative. "Eva," he murmured softly, "there's something I want to show you." She glanced at him, curiosity sparking in her eyes. "What is it?" He hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. He handed it to her, his gaze filled with a mix of anticipation and nervousness. With a frown, Eva unfolded the paper, her eyes widening as she took in the detailed sketches and notes scrawled across the page. It was a design, a building, by the looks of it. And not just any building. "This is a studio?" she murmured, glancing up at him in surprise. Adrian nodded slowly, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I've been working on this project for a while now. It's a creative space for designers and artists. A place where people like you, people with vision and passion, can come together to create without boundaries. I wanted to build something meaningful, something that might make a difference." Eva stared at the sketches, her heart swelling with a mixture of awe and emotion. "It's beautiful, Adrian," she whispered. "But why are you showing this to me?" "Because it's inspired by you," he admitted softly. "By your strength, your resilience, your creativity. I wanted to create a space that embodies everything I admire about you, everything that makes you, you." Tears welled up in Eva's eyes, and she looked away, struggling to keep her emotions in check. This was too much. Too beautiful, too meaningful. She didn't know if she was ready to accept this, to let herself believe that they could have something real again. "Adrian," she whispered, shaking her head. "I don't know if I can. I'm not asking for anything," he interrupted gently, his voice filled with sincerity. "I'm not trying to pressure you or rush you. I wanted you to know. I wanted you to see that I'm trying, that I'm doing everything I can to be better. For you. For us." Eva took a deep, shuddering breath, her gaze drifting back to the sketches in her hand. The lines and shapes blurred as tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them away, focusing on the intricate details Adrian had poured into his design. It was beautiful. And more than that, it was a testament to how much he had changed, how hard he was trying to make amends. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you completely," she murmured, her voice trembling. "But I'm willing to try. I'm willing to see where this goes." Adrian's eyes shone with hope and relief, and he reached out, his hand hovering just inches from hers. "That's all I could ever ask for, Eva." She hesitated, then slowly, cautiously, placed her hand in his. It was a small gesture, but it felt monumental. It felt like the first step towards something new, something real. They stood there in the park, hands entwined, the world around them fading into the background. And for the first time in a long while, Eva allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. Chapter 19: A New Beginning. As winter approached, the city transformed into a wonderland of glittering lights and snow-covered streets. The festive spirit seemed to seep into every corner of Eva's life, and with it came a sense of renewal, a sense that maybe, just maybe, she could leave the pain of the past behind and embrace the possibility of a future with Adrian. Their weekly meetings turned into something more, evolving from cautious conversations to moments of genuine connection and laughter. They began spending more time together, not just as two people trying to heal, but as friends, as companions. One snowy evening, as they walked through the city, Adrian turned to her, his eyes shining with a mix of hope and anticipation. "Eva," he murmured softly, his breath forming clouds of mist in the chilly air, "I want to ask you something." She glanced at him, her heart skipping a beat. "What is it?" He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. Eva's breath caught in her throat, her eyes widening as she stared at it. "Before you say anything, just hear me out," Adrian said quickly, his voice earnest. "I know we've been through a lot. I know I've hurt you, and I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I love you, Eva. I've loved you from the moment I first saw you, and I will love you for the rest of my life. I'm not asking for an answer right now. I'm not even asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know how I feel." Slowly, he opened the box, revealing a delicate, intricately designed pendant in the shape of a rose, the same symbol he had used in his sketches for the studio. "It's not a ring," he murmured softly. "It's not a proposal. It's a promise. A promise that I'll always be here for you, no matter what. A promise that I will never give up on us." Eva stared at the pendant, her heart swelling with a mixture of love and uncertainty. This was too much, too overwhelming. But at the same time, it was exactly what she needed to hear. With trembling hands, she reached out and gently took the box from him. "Adrian," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he murmured, his gaze filled with love. "Just know that I'm here. And I'll always be here, waiting." Eva looked up at him, her heart pounding wildly. Maybe they couldn't go back to the way things were. But maybe they didn't have to. Maybe, just maybe, they could create something even more beautiful. Together. Entangled Desires, Part 10. Chapter 20: Reclaiming Love. The pendant around Eva's neck was more than just a piece of jewelry. It was a promise, a tangible reminder of the sincerity in Adrian's words, of his unwavering commitment to rebuilding what they'd lost. As she ran her fingers over the delicate rose design, she felt a tiny flicker of hope light up inside her, a hope that maybe, just maybe, they could truly start over. Their relationship continued to evolve, each day bringing with it new challenges and small victories. Trust, once shattered, was not easily rebuilt. But Adrian was patient. He never pushed her, never demanded more than she was willing to give. Instead, he took each step forward at her pace, never wavering in his support. They began working on projects together, Adrian's studio design and a new collaborative collection for Eva's brand. It was a professional endeavor that allowed them to reconnect through their shared passion for creativity and design. Slowly, the barriers that had separated them began to dissolve, replaced by a deeper understanding of each other's strengths, vulnerabilities, and dreams. One evening, as they stood in the empty shell of the building that would become Adrian's studio, Eva glanced around at the bare walls and unfinished floors, a sense of excitement bubbling up inside her. "It's going to be amazing," she murmured softly, her gaze drifting over the space. "I can already see it." Adrian turned to her, his eyes shining with a mix of pride and hope. "I couldn't have done it without you," he said quietly. "You're the inspiration behind it all, Eva." She felt a blush creep up her cheeks and looked away, her heart fluttering. "I didn't do much. This is your vision, Adrian. You made it happen." "Maybe," he murmured, stepping closer, his gaze locked on hers. "But you gave me a reason to believe I could." They stood there, the silence between them charged with unspoken emotions. Slowly, Adrian reached out and gently cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing over her skin in a tender caress. "Eva," he whispered, his voice filled with a raw intensity that sent shivers down her spine. "I know I've said it before, but I love you. And I'll spend the rest of my life proving it to you if you'll let me." Tears welled up in her eyes, and she swallowed hard, her heart swelling with a mixture of love and uncertainty. I love you too, Adrian," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But I'm still scared. I'm scared of getting hurt again." "I know," he murmured, his gaze never leaving hers. "And I don't expect those fears to disappear overnight. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to show you that you can trust me again." She stared at him, her breath hitching at the sincerity in his eyes. Slowly, she reached up and placed her hand over his, the warmth of his touch seeping into her skin. "I want to trust you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I want to believe that we can make this work." "We can," he murmured softly, leaning down until his forehead rested against hers. "We will. I promise." And for the first time in a long while, Eva allowed herself to believe him. They spent the next few weeks pouring their energy into the studio, working side by side to transform the empty space into a vibrant, welcoming haven for designers and artists. It was hard work, long days filled with planning, designing, and overseeing construction. But through it all, Eva felt a sense of purpose, a sense of excitement that she hadn't experienced in a long time. And as the studio began to take shape, so too did their relationship. There were still moments of hesitation, moments when old fears and doubts would resurface. But each time, Adrian was there, offering her patience and understanding, never once pushing her beyond what she was ready to give. One evening, as they stood together in the now furnished main hall of the studio, Adrian turned to her, his gaze filled with a quiet kind of joy. "It's almost finished," he murmured softly, his eyes drifting over the space. "Can you believe it?" Eva smiled, her heart swelling with pride and happiness. "It's beautiful," she whispered, looking up at him. "You did it, Adrian." "We did it," he corrected gently, his gaze warm. "Together." She felt a lump form in her throat and blinked back tears, overwhelmed by the depth of emotion in his voice. He had worked so hard, poured so much of himself into this project, not just for himself, but for her as well. And as she stood there, surrounded by the fruits of their labor, she realized just how much he had come to mean to her. "I'm proud of you," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "So proud." Adrian's eyes softened, and he reached out, gently pulling her into his arms. She melted against him, savoring the warmth of his embrace, the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. "I love you, Eva," he murmured, pressing a soft kiss to her hair. "I always will." "I love you too," she whispered, tightening her arms around him. "And I'm ready, Adrian. I'm ready to try again. To give us a real chance." Adrian's breath hitched, and he pulled back slightly, his gaze searching hers. "Are you sure?" "Yes," she said softly, her heart swelling with a mixture of love and determination. "I'm sure." A slow, radiant smile spread across his face, and he leaned down, capturing her lips in a tender, lingering kiss. Eva closed her eyes, the sensation of his warmth, his love, flooding through her like a balm to her wounded soul. They stood there, wrapped up in each other, the world around them fading away. And in that moment, Eva knew, with a certainty that went beyond words, that they had found their way back to each other. Chapter 21: A Future Together. The grand opening of Adrian's studio was a resounding success. Designers, artists, and industry leaders from across the city gathered to celebrate the launch of a space that was destined to become a hub of creativity and innovation. The atmosphere buzzed with excitement, the air filled with the hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses. Eva stood by Adrian's side, her heart swelling with pride as she watched him address the crowd, his voice filled with passion and gratitude. He spoke about his vision for the studio, about the importance of supporting creativity and collaboration, and about the journey that had led him to this moment. "And I have someone very special to thank," Adrian said softly, his gaze drifting to Eva, his eyes shining with love. "Someone who believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. Someone who inspired me to create a space where people can come together to share their ideas, their dreams, and their talents." The crowd's attention shifted to Eva, and she felt a flush of warmth spread across her cheeks as applause erupted around her. Adrian smiled, his gaze never leaving hers. "Thank you, Eva," he murmured, his voice filled with emotion. "For everything." Tears welled up in her eyes, and she smiled back at him, her heart brimming with love and pride. "Thank you, Adrian," she whispered softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "For showing me what real love and forgiveness can look like." As the evening continued, Eva found herself surrounded by friends, colleagues, and admirers, all eager to congratulate her on the success of the studio and her own continued achievements. But even in the midst of the celebration, her gaze kept drifting back to Adrian, her heart swelling with a sense of peace and contentment. They had come so far. From heartbreak and betrayal to healing and reconciliation, they had weathered storms that could have torn them apart forever. But they had chosen to fight for each other, to rebuild the trust that had been broken, to forge a new path forward. And now, as she watched Adrian laughing and smiling, his eyes filled with a joy she hadn't seen in a long time, she knew that they were exactly where they were meant to be. When the evening finally wound down, and the guests began to depart, Adrian turned to her, his gaze soft and filled with love. "Ready to go home?" he murmured, his voice gentle. Eva nodded, slipping her hand into his. "Yes. Let's go home." They left the studio hand in hand, stepping out into the cool night air. The city lights shimmered around them, casting a soft, golden glow over the streets. As they walked together, their footsteps in sync, Eva felt a sense of calm settle over her, a sense of rightness, of belonging. They were home. And no matter what challenges the future might hold, Eva knew that they would face them together. Because they had found their way back to each other. And this time, they were never letting go.